Hello, everybody, and welcome to Let's Talk Stories. I guess I'm trying to figure out if we should call it Over Presents Let's Talk Stories and say its full name because we're fancy, or if we should just call it Let's Talk Stories. But whatever. Today we're calling it Let's Talk Stories. We have our first guest today, who is Jaylon's sister, Jada. Say hello to
Hi,
everybody.
how's everyone?
And then you have the huge. You have Charles. I don't know what it looks like as far as what other people can see, but for me, Charles is in the upper right corner, and down below you have Jaylon, and then of course there's me, Jared. And today we are going to talk about Twilight.
Dun dun dun.
So before we jump into that, we're going to do the usual, and Jada, you can participate in this as well. First of all, I want to know how everybody is doing. How was your weekend? Did you guys have good time, do anything interesting or fun?
I've been running around like a chicken with my head chopped off, but it's only chopped off halfway, so I can still smile.
That works.
My weekend was miserable. I had to start teaching students again today because winter break's over, and my body decided to tell me to wake up at 5, even though I didn't have to get up and do stuff until hours later. So I'm like dying on the inside, but I am happy to talk about Twilight. Like I kept telling myself, I'm like, if you get through this, you could talk about Twilight. So that's
Low key, that is how I have been getting through the day too. So
so.
What
My
about
weekend
you,
was
Jada?
great because it's the first weekend I've had off of work since like starting school, 2 years ago? So I slept like the whole time.
Solid. I had a pretty good weekend. Relatively good weekend. Nobody knows this, I guess, but by the time you guys hear this, I would have healed. However, at the time of recording last week, after we did the podcast, I bit it and hit my face off the side of our house and sprained my knee, thanks to my dog, who decided to take off on the rainy back porch. So I was relegated to the couch for the week, but I made good use of my weekend by having a movie weekend, which ended with the Twilight. Well, the weekend didn't end. It began, I should say, with the end of the Twilight saga, and then rolled into a series of varying degrees of good and bad movies. The worst of which was The Adopted, which, for the sake of ruining everybody else's life, I recommend that you watch it. It's on Tubi. It is the worst movie that has ever been made, and that exists in the world where The Room exists. Okay, we're not going to do that. Listen. But in this other movie that I once watched called, I think it was called Jaws something Christmas. It was about a shark that was killing people during Christmas. It was really weird, but it was horrible. But this was way worse than that. Highlight of the movie was a young boy who told his adopted mother that her chicken was dry and it was bullshit. And I thought it was hilarious. So yeah, that was my weekend.
Tubi's weird.
It is.
I found like an independent movie using Legos retelling the Old Testament on Tubi. I thought it was high. I was like, there's no way this is a thing, but it is. I'm like, this is amazing.
Homeschooler. This is a joke for Jaden and I. Some homeschooler just had nothing to do over summer break.
So I'm just gonna make this and put it on Tubi. So all of that said, what have you guys been enjoying this past week? Like as far as watching, reading, listening to anything interesting?
I just dove into listening to Owl City again today to get my brain to focus on the one thing that was in front of me instead of the 20 things on my to-do list. And I still love Owl City. Still a vibe.
Okay. I like Owl City too.
I got to see, I don't know if this was before or after we last recorded, but I got to see, no, it was after, Sonic the Hedgehog 3 in the theater with my boy Shadow, or that had my boy Shadow. That was great. I love that. I finally got to show my mom Furiosa, a Mad Max Saga, which is still, this movie is like, oh my gosh, I could go on and on about this. And I finally finished the epic musical, and just it said again, it's like, you okay? I'm like, I'm okay. It's really good.
Nice.
What about you, Jada?
I have been rewatching Boy Meets World for like the third time, and I cannot get over how good it is. It's just my favorite show ever. It's so good. It can make me laugh and cry in the same episode. It's awesome.
Nice.
Nice. I love Boy Meets World. For me, I have ADHD, so I mean, like, I can't ever stick with anything at all. So I had a series of stuff that I enjoyed. I watched like 3 episodes of The Expanse, 4 episodes of Battlestar Galactica, Chuck, and then
Really?
yeah, I know, Joe. I did. I watched some Chuck, and then I also I finished Their Eyes Were Watching God this morning, the book, and it was fantastic. Every part of that book, I will say it again and I'll say it a million times. It is probably the greatest book I have ever read in my life, and it will change your soul if you read it. So, yeah, that's me. Now to talk about things that will change your soul in a horrible way. Let's talk about Twilight. So, I'm just kidding. I will not be mean. I will be mean, but I will not be cruel to Twilight at all today. So I have so many questions, so many different things we want to talk about. The first question I have before we jump into categories, because I feel like everybody here has some sort of history. I think everybody in the world has some sort of history with Twilight in some way, shape, or form. So I'm curious as to what each and every one of you guys' personal perspective, how were all of your personal perspectives shaped by, not even that, I guess the better question is, what are you guys' histories with Twilight? And we will start with Jaylon. You could start us off.
Actually, Jada has to start first.
Okay.
Her story.
Oh, because she corrupted you.
Yes.
Okay, you go first.
I did not have the same history with Twilight as a lot of people that I feel like were kind of in my age category. I watched it a lot later from like the whole bandwagon when like everyone was obsessed with it. I kind of watched it more towards like when people were sick of it and making jokes about it. And it was just out of a curiosity. I was like sick. It felt like a fever dream the first time I watched it because I was on death's door for sure. And I watched it out of pure boredom and curiosity. I was pretty taken by the aesthetic of it. I feel like it has a very strong aesthetic, and there's a lot of things that contribute to that. Storyline-wise, I was in shock, I think, at first. It's definitely not what I expected. So I have very mixed feelings. I think that from a marketing standpoint, there's a lot of things that they did very strongly and a lot of things that I think were intentional. As far as the script and like movie itself, not my favorite unless I'm sick.
But you were obsessed enough with it to tell me you have to watch this.
I was.
Yeah.
Well, also
so
I think
you did get
me to suffer, you have to
suffer. Okay, fair. But you did get me to sit down and watch it, and I probably had the most visceral reaction to a plot twist that I have ever had to any movie, book, anything in my life. So I will say Twilight gets that one.
Are you talking?
Yes, Breaking Dawn 2. My soul left my body. I screamed. I was not okay for a long time. I needed Jada to pause the movie so I could compose myself.
It was really bad. She was like reaching for her soul. You could see her. It was like that before.
So, as much as like, whatever my history with it is, whatever my feelings of it are, like, it still wins that prize that it got me with the plot twist more so than any other book or movie I've seen.
Fair.
I'm the one that apparently has the most history with this.
Yeah, probably.
Basically it was my older sister was into it, showing me the first one around the time when I started freshman year of high school. So I had to deal with all of that crap, all the teenagers, all the opinions, all the Gen Xers opinions, and all over the place. And I saw them in theaters. I liked them at the time because you have to remember there was a lot of weird stuff going on when I was in high school at that age. So everything was heightened, like for me. And then it ended, and I moved on. And I didn't really care, and I was like, whatever. And life moved on, and then in 2020,
dun, dun, dun.
I rewatched them. They were the funniest things in the world, because you had to remember back in the early 2010s, it was like the devil, right? Because people are the dumbest mother bleepers in the world, right? So they're like, oh, it's the worst thing ever. No, whatever. But in 2020, I laughed so hard. Each of them, these movies, and I've listened to the audiobook of the first ones, and I actually did read, what was that? The one side book of the third one of the girl vampire who gets brutally murdered. I can't remember. I read that too.
Rosalie?
No.
I don't know what the book is called.
Brave, something like that. You know what I'm talking about. And they're all like the worst one and the best one in the whole series. It's hilarious. Like, to this day, like, as a non sequitur, I will just go like, you should put your seatbelt on, to like my siblings, and we know exactly what it's freaking hilarious. It is camp. It's like the creme de la creme of camp, and I think it's hilarious. But on a less ironic end, I have a lot of comments about this, like from like treating it seriously, and it keeps me up at night. Not really, but like metaphorically, it keeps me up at night. And I've heard they're making like a new cartoon or something on Netflix, and I'm like, yes, I think you can take this and make it better. But that's just, again, we'll save that for me. I had an extra anecdote, but then we will go on and on and on about this. So just know it was funny. That's all.
So for me, I had my history with it has been, so I saw it when it was first came out and all of that. I was just out of high school when the first one came out, and I remember I was dating this girl at the time, and she made me watch it because she told me that like it was the kind of love that she felt she deserved, and I was like, okay, whatever, I'll watch this, whatever. And then I remember watching it, and then I remember thinking, at the time, so you want me to stalk you, and you want me to be, overly possessive. Totally got it. Not going to do it, but I totally understand. So I remember that, and then the rest of the movies came out, and I didn't watch any of them until probably, I want to say maybe 2013-ish, I think, was when I just watched them all. And I remember at the time, I didn't think they were funny. I just thought, this is garbage. What am I watching? And it was like, it was also kind of a lesson, because at the time I was like really obsessed with writing this audio drama, and I wanted to do vampires, and I had this idea about like, I'm obsessed with vampires. Anybody who knows me, I love vampires. I will tell vampire stories till I die. But I wanted to write the story about a vampire who fell in love with a werewolf, and so I knew that everything that it was about had to be the opposite of Twilight. So I made sure that I watched it so that it would not be like that. And then I never watched Twilight again until this past week. And so when I watched it this past week, I had a completely different experience with it. One, I recognized the problematic behavior of many of the characters in the story, as well as the idea of okay, you know what? I'm not even going to go into that. We'll get into that as we go. But the point is, it was definitely a lot funnier watching it this time around. And I was just like, why did people like this? I did come away with it with the clear understanding that the Twilight Saga in general is not necessarily objectively bad. It is just, I am not the audience for this thing. It wasn't made for me. It was made for teenage girls and boys that like vampires and stuff, and that's totally cool.
You were also introduced to it in a very traumatic way. I think that the takeaway here is that whoever made you watch Twilight shaped your perspective of it.
To be fair, too, Twilight was also considered like the new Notebook when I was growing up. So it was like the Notebook which is also a problematic movie, but the Notebook with. Don't worry, I will explain that to you someday as to why I feel it's problematic. Overall,
it's kind of weird. I'll be honest. It's okay.
I just find there's this interesting argument, and it's kind of interesting because it even flows into Twilight as well. Of like, there's this interesting thing in Hollywood where it seems like they paint the picture of the ideal fantasy for women to be something to do with infidelity. So as long as you are cheating on somebody or leaving somebody, look at every Hallmark movie ever made, it somehow resonates as romantic. And I think that's hilarious and also horrible. So all that being said, I want to jump into actual story lessons for as well as we do have a marketing section, so we will touch on that as well. But first, let's talk about characters, specifically protagonists. So Bella Swan is the protagonist of the story. And do you feel, well, let me ask this question. What do you think outside of Twilight makes a compelling protagonist? And how do you feel Bella stacked up to that ideal or to that, whatever that is for you? Whoever wants to jump in can jump in.
That's a loaded question.
That's why
it's me. No. I come with the heavy stuff.
I'm trying to find a way to say this quickly without giving a lecture series on my TED Talk channel. Okay, so this is a weird comment, not a weird comment, but I'm going to use this as the quickest example, right? Is I think a good protagonist is someone you can root for in terms of you find them interesting. So, for example, randomly turned on the first 10 minutes of Tangled last night because it was on TV, right? Which is one of the best Disney movies, anime movies, whatever, right? So I was watching this and I thought it was fascinating that this movie within about 5-7 minutes got me to believe in Rapunzel instantly. And I understood who she was and what she wanted and where she came from and her pain, what makes her happy, why she wants what she wants, and how she goes about her day. So I think what makes a really good protagonist is where you see them and you can understand where they're coming from. So off the top of my head, again, scatterbrained here, I'm working on very little sleep today. Another really good protagonist is Hellboy. You pick the movies, the comics, but it's okay, why are you bringing it up against Rapunzel? Because Hellboy is a completely different character from Rapunzel. Because one, he smokes cigars, everything. He's tougher, he's bigger and more violent of a character, but he's quiet, and you can tell he's quieter, and you can tell he's more mature, and you can tell he's got a lot going on in his head. There's stuff going on in his head, and you want to see what he does next. You're curious to see how is he going to do it. I think we lost someone. Oh, no.
I think so.
We did.
I told you. I begged you not to let me go on the lecture tour.
I think she'll be back. I'll let her back in as soon as she comes in.
We blame the Wyoming connection.
I will try to finish this then. But I think you find a good protagonist is someone that you find interesting and not just a staple for nonsense. So it's not they're sarcastic because being sarcastic is hip, or they're mean. Remember, because we all go through those trends, right? Right now, young protagonists have to be really hip and sarcastic and witty, but back in the early 20s, they had to be emo and dark and serious no matter who they were. And I think what makes a good protagonist, and again, I'm trying to simplify here, is someone that you can find interesting and someone you can root for, even if they're not a good person, but you're curious. So the Richard, I think it's Richard Stark Parker stories. Parker's a terrible human being, but he's an interesting character and he's different because there's something about him that you go, who is this guy? Why is this guy? Or you can understand him, right? Bella Swan, on the other hand, does not work for me. I know there's a whole thing about she's supposed to be the character that you put yourself in for. I just don't think that works for me because I think she has zero personality. And I've seen these movies several times. I don't know what she's into. I don't know what she's good at. The only thing I know, she wants Edward. That's it. And I just don't think that makes for a compelling character, protagonist, because I don't know, what is she suffering? What does she want? What is she afraid of? And all that jazz. I don't think there's anything there. Hooray! You're back.
Hooray!
I'm so sorry. It's me. It's my fault. Okay.
No, you're okay.
But yeah, so ultimately, in a nutshell, I don't think Bella has any character, really. And I think that's, first of all, it doesn't make a lot of sense with the romance. I don't know what Edward sees in her. I don't at all. And
she smells good.
I guess it really, like, all joking aside, it really doesn't make a lot of sense to me, and I don't think it makes for an interesting story. Which is, by the way, here's an interesting example. Imagine if Twilight was about Jasper and Alice.
Yes.
See, so first of all, I always thought these were kind of interesting characters and just kind of okay, but they're weird, right? So first of all, Alice comes in and makes everything happy. She has an interesting power. Okay, she sees the future. She's perky and fun, and her boyfriend is this weird, Confederate, soldier. That's moving on, but he's got his own stuff, and there's an interesting story there. So every time they come on screen, I'm like, no, stay, do something interesting. But I guess that's what I'm trying to say is I just don't think Bella has anything going as a character other than kind of a MacGuffin function. And I don't, personally, that doesn't work for me because then you have to be kind of more interesting. And I'd like to say, well, no, wait, that's a different conversation. That's style. Never mind. That's style. I'm done now. Sorry. I'm done. I talk too much, everyone.
What about you're good. What about you, Shayla? What do you think?
So I agree with everything that Charles said. I would say that for me, what makes an interesting character is one that I can relate to or one that I want to be like. And if they overlap in some way, if there's parts of a character that I admire and then other parts that are very different from me or I don't admire but I understand, I find myself really drawn in because I can see a piece of myself in that character, but that piece is just a stepping stone to helping me understand who this character really is that's different from me. I think this is a really good proof to your point, Jared, that it was a movie made for teenagers because teenagers will see themselves in Bella as far as when you're a teenager, the one thing that you like becomes your entire existence. Sometimes it's hard to have room for balance because your brain is still developing and experiencing all these different passions for the first time. So I do agree that she was not well-rounded. We didn't know enough about her to really care. And then another thing about characters is if your protagonist frustrates your audience, I think that's a great way to play with their emotions and draw them in. But if they frustrate your audience too much, then you're just immediately turned off. I found myself when I was rewatching Twilight very frustrated by Bella, mostly in the love triangle part, but that's also because I absolutely hate love triangles as a personal preference, so that might just be a personal thing. Those are my thoughts.
I might have kind of an unpopular opinion on this.
What about you, Jared? What do you think?
I agree that a protagonist should be someone that you can root for, but also someone that you can relate to. And I think that Bella as a character, I think there are some interesting ideas to her character. I think that it goes a lot deeper than the way it was portrayed makes it look. And I think that to me, it kind of feels like a missed opportunity for a character with a lot of depth that is very relatable to viewers, especially keeping in mind the target audience. I personally think that Bella's character suffered from mental health, like, really badly. And I think it's reflected in certain instances, obviously. And which one was it? Eclipse? Is that the one where she was, like, severely depressed? Yeah. I think that New Moon, yeah. I think that
that's New Moon number 2.
It's like showing little snippets of like her character are shown, but I don't think that that's the point of a protagonist. I think you're supposed to be able to understand that character. And I like the idea that, I mean, her power in the last movie, it's revealed that she's a shield. I think that's interesting because I think it reflects how she lives her life as a person. I think she's a very shielded, guarded person. And she has a hard time letting people in. And I think that, again, that goes back to mental health. I think there's other ways to show that in a character without completely closing off the character to the viewer, because then you can't understand the character. And that's why she appears a very shallow, disconnected, very annoying character. I think it could have been done a lot better, but I like the concept of the character.
I have a lot of thoughts about Bella. The whole shield thing, though, starting there, it irritated me to no end that it took me 5 movies to find that out, because I kept wondering why, like, they said we can't read your thoughts, we can't do that kind of thing, and I was like, okay, cool, you're and you can't be affected by like the Altori and all of that, and the Volturi, whatever, I forget what they're called, but
Volturi,
the whole Vampire Council, yeah, them. And you can't, they can't. None of their powers work on you either, and all that. And I was like, okay, cool. You're freaking cool, but why? Why are you cool? Why, And so that annoyed me. But I was able to look past that. And Charles, we will discuss that freaking baby anyway, because that was the other thing that annoyed the hell out of me about this movie. But the overall thought about Bella, though, is that when I first saw Bella, I wanted to say, because before I jump into Bella, I guess I should say what I think a good protagonist is as well. And for me, a good protagonist is definitely I agree with all of you, specifically with relatability. I feel like if a protagonist isn't relatable to you, or relatable to someone that you know, something that's recognizable, something that resonates with you in some way, shape, or form. Because there are plenty of characters that have been protagonists that I personally have never, I couldn't say that I'm like them, or that there's something about them that's me, but I can say, oh, I know somebody similar to that, or that person reminds me of whatever. There has to be some sort of familiarity. And I think, along with what Jada said as well, is the idea that it should have been done a lot sooner than they did, because I feel like the whole purpose of the protagonist is your protagonist is the vehicle in which you travel through the entire story with. So if I'm going to take a road trip with you somewhere, I have to like you at least hopefully, you know what I mean? I don't, unless we're making a really great, buddy cop type of road trip movie. But other than that, generally speaking, I have to like you on some level. And if I don't like you from the start, the going through the journey with you feels more like a chore. With Bella, it literally felt like a chore to get through movie to movie to movie with her, because I didn't like her from the beginning. I wanted to like her a lot of the time. I wanted to like her, and I understood like there were certain things, but it did feel like Charles was saying, like, I didn't know anything about her other than, okay, she's really clumsy and she is awkward, and that's cool and all, but like, tell me more. Like, that's a good place to start, but let's get some more going. And I feel like it never quite went there. Even as the movies went on, I do agree with the mental health thing where she had like the whole mental breakdown and was doing all that. My cat has a beef with her because she scared the hell out of him with her nightmare screams. But overall, I think that the character was very, very flat as a character. And maybe that, and I feel like Edward and Jacob were more interesting than Bella was. Not much, but definitely more interesting than Bella, which is weird considering Bella is the protagonist of the story. So it kind of felt like Bella was just a piece of furniture in the whole story. Like, she was just there to be there, and sort of like the object of desire and pursuing, all of these other things. And so I guess that's just my perspective of her, is that I didn't personally enjoy her. And I think that if you're going to create a protagonist, your goal should be to create somebody that other people can resonate with. I think you get all kinds of crazy advice about like save the cat and make your character do, likable things. But I think it starts first with make the character somebody that we can recognize. And as soon as you can do that, my favorite example of that, before I move on to the next question, is Tony Soprano. Tony Soprano is the perfect example because he is a character that I'm pretty sure most of us cannot relate to and look at ourselves and say, I'm like this guy, because most of us are not sociopathic or violent or any of those types of things, but you can relate to the idea of a guy who is working his ass off for his family, who is willing to do whatever it takes to make sure his family's okay, who's a little bit touched in the head when it comes to his mental health and kind of needs to address that, and is trying to, in a world where the rest of the world doesn't quite have as much sympathy, especially for the time in which that show came out, which was like 1999. And so the idea of mental health was like a really, thing. And then in the Mafia, it was even worse. So you can relate to that. And because of that, it's a character that you want to spend time with, even if you don't agree with all of their decisions. So I think that when you're going to create a character for our listeners, think about how this character is going to connect with the reader or watcher or whoever or whatever it is that you're creating. That being said, let's talk about supporting cast. Do you feel that the secondary characters enhanced the world, or do you feel like they are filler? I have very strong thoughts about this. So I'm going to let you guys go first before I explode. Whoever wants to jump in can jump in.
Okay, I guess I'll rip this bandit off. Yes and no. So I couldn't care less about most of these minor characters. The high schoolers.
Sorry.
I mean, poor Bella's dad, Charlie, which I still never understood why she always calls him by his first name. I honestly generally don't understand that, but like he's just a poor sap who gets manipulated by his daughter all the time. And I can't think of any of the minor characters in the whole thing that do anything. Again, I find them blank. I find them nothing, except I've always found this vampire family really interesting. Now, why they force themselves into high school, no idea. I don't get it at all. But I always thought this little clan made by this dude, I can't remember if Carlisle was a pastor or a priest, something like that.
He was a physician.
No, but he was. It's something like he was a religious person as a human being. In the book, okay. I think it says like this. And like I know I'm kind of reading into this from the book or something like that, but like he found a way to survive by eating deer without eating humans and bringing together people in this family. I thought was really interesting because basically 100%. Carlisle, for the record, he's the best character in this whole enchilada. I don't know why, but like
for sure,
he's good. But like he's calm. Yeah, he's calm and he's nice. But you get the feeling the dude has like really suffered something, and bringing together all these different dudes and vampires together to survive and not be so lonely and screwed up, I think is really interesting. Like we're jumping a little bit ahead here. I think this is in the movie and not something my sister told me from the books, but like Rosalie, right? The blonde. Mm-hmm. She's totally mean and she's, all catty, blah, blah, blah. But she always wanted a kid. She didn't get to have her kid way back when. So when their kid's born, she's caring for the baby because it's the thing that she always kind of wanted. It's really nice. And so every time I watch this series, I'm like, why isn't it about them? Mm-hmm. Because the whole plot of these movies is like really thin. It has to do something with Bella being in trouble and blah, 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 blah. I don't care. I just don't find it interesting. It's not enough to sustain a lot of interesting drama. But them though, that was really interesting. These vampire people, I always wanted to see that done in a different way. Which, by the way, I'm going to jump with what you said, Jada. A lot of what with Twilight, like all joking aside, I don't think it's inherently stupid. And I don't think it's inherently bad. I just think the execution is way off base. Way off base. I take.
I will second that. Do think, obviously, the vampire family all had my heart for every character, especially once you started learning about their backstories. I feel like the division between the characters that you cared about and the characters that didn't was very clearly which ones had backstory. Which one had a story before the story started that influences why they are the way they are now. So that is the importance of backstory, number one. Another, I kind of feel like hearing you talk, Charles, I feel like the movie was supposed to be about this vampire clan the family that Carlisle has created. But because Bella was the protagonist, they tried to make the movie about her. When really, like, maybe she was the best one to tell the story because experiencing this vampire family for the first time, it would be really interesting to get to know them as if you were a human and you didn't believe that vampires existed. So I think that they tried to go with like an interesting point of view to tell this story about Carlisle's family, but they did it without using a protagonist, using a vehicle, like you said, Jared, that we actually wanted to be in.
Yeah, so like, sorry, just occurred to me, like randomly. And so the second movie is about the breakup. Jacob comes in. We'll get to Jacob in a second. And then Vampire Mafia, the end. That's literally the second movie, right? Would it be great if like Edward and Bella, they went to like a trip to meet cousins who hated humans or something like that? I don't know. I guess I'm saying is if she's a human, she's dating a vampire, and it's Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. If it was Guess Who's Coming to Dinner for preteens and teenagers with vampires, I would totally be down for that. I don't think it's a bad idea. Sorry. I find that interesting.
Before Jada says anything, I think it would be even better if you dramatized Meet the Fockers, and then turn that into Twilight, and just make it Bella already with Edward coming to meet the Cullens, and then you can get that human perspective of what it's like to meet vampires, that they're a family.
Jared's like,
but direct that movie someday. Anyway, Jada,
I feel like the entire Cullen family, arguably, in my perspective, I feel like the movie was more about them than Bella. I think, again, like you guys said, I think that Bella was kind of just this character that they just kind of jumped on the bandwagon and followed her through the story. I don't love how that was executed because like you said, there's so many interesting characters. And I think that the character development that they show throughout the series is just so much more engaging and fascinating to the viewers than this random human that for some reason everyone's obsessed with. I think that, what was the movie where you get everyone's backstory? Was that one Eclipse? I think it was. Where they're creating like the whole vampire army or whatever, and you get all the backstories of like these characters in their human lives. And I think that's so interesting because you see the character development of this same person, but almost two separate characters. Like, yes, they carry things over from their human life and that develops who they are as a character, but their human selves is almost a completely separate like entity to who they are now in like what we're viewing. And I think that also gives an interesting opportunity for growth of the characters, because if you think about it, they've been alive for so long. Character development doesn't happen in the same time frame that we would think with a normal human character. So I think that creates a lot of opportunities, but also a struggle, because how do you show a character development of someone that's like 104 years old? But I think that the supporting characters are far more interesting than the protagonist.
I get that. I agree with that. I think that's interesting. I think my biggest beef with the supporting characters in these movies, was the human beings. All of them. Every single one of them. Except Charlie and Renee. I didn't totally hate them. Especially Charlie. I actually like Charlie. But the rest of them, no. No. I refuse to acknowledge their existence because they felt like, this is an example, and I've seen this in other people's work as well. And I think if you're going to write something, you have to be mindful of this. Is sometimes when you're telling a story, I run into this problem all the time, where you're creating a story and you get so excited about the protagonist and the antagonist, maybe the love interest, maybe the guide, and you have like all of these archetypes that really, really, like, you're really excited about those stories. But then you're like, oh, well, this world feels really, really small, and I need some other people. So you start creating other people that don't really do anything for the story, but they fill it out a little bit. And it felt like all of the human beings were just there to fill it out. Like, when I saw all the humans at the wedding, and what's that, 4?
That's 4 part 1.
Yeah.
Also,
yeah,
I
No,
love that
same.
wedding
It's so
venue.
pretty.
The whole thing with the trees. Sorry, that's my just girliness. I just want to throw it out there. I always thought it was really lovely. Moving on.
No, definitely the wedding. Yes. Yes.
I mean, like, when I saw them at the wedding, I was like, why are they here? Like, what purpose are they serving for the story? Are they padding out the, like, I understand why Alice invited them. They were supposed to be Bella's friends, but like they were only really Bella's friends until Bella started hanging out with the Cullens, and then they weren't really her friends anymore. She kind of just blew them off and was just like, I don't need you guys anymore. I'm cool now, And so she like disappeared, and then they were like clawing at her, like, take a picture with us, Bella, and she was like, all right, whatever. And then that was it. Like, I was just like, okay. And then that random thing, and I think it was in 2, where she was like, she went out to the movies with Jessica or whatever, and then just abandoned her.
And Mike went to the movies with Bella because there was
a
thing with the hand.
They went shopping. I think they went shopping.
That's
together.
with Jessica and Bella.
Yeah, she went shopping with Jessica, and then she went and. We'll talk about the Jacob and Mike thing, because that was a whole other thing. But she went with Jessica, and they went to this whole shopping thing, and then she just abandoned her to go get on the backseat of a motorcycle with some random dude. And then Jessica just comes back, and it's like, what's wrong with you? Are you a mental person? And I'm like, yeah, okay, why are you here? Like, I don't understand. You didn't even need to be here. You didn't. This is unnecessary. And then, yes, that the movie thing was also weird. I'm sorry. I know that Jacob was supposed to be going through his whole, like, I'm becoming a man / wolf thing, and so I'm for some reason extra masculine and aggressive, and so he just went from like he was feeling okay. So he was feeling his inner wolf, and then Bella's laying on him, and then dude comes out, he's like, I feel sick, I need to go home, and all empathy is gone for some reason, and he's just like, do you want me to put you in the hospital? And I was like, whoa, bro, what? Like, whoa, like, where did that come from?
He's so wolf.
No, I've never seen a wolf just be like, can I put you in the hospital? No.
Low key, okay, this might be a little dramatic, but I don't think it is. I think Jacob's a dramatic one. I feel like Jacob's maturity into a werewolf, a wolf, whatever, is more dramatic than any teenage girl going through puberty.
That is fair. That entire scene was just weird. Like, I get that, Mike was being,
pasty.
Yeah, he was being a little extra, and he was mad because the girl that he liked wasn't there with him alone. And I've been there. I get it. I get how you would be. And so you make an excuse to leave so you don't seem like the creeper, whatever. I get that. But realistically speaking, if I was in that situation and some dude just got off the stairs and got in my face and was like, I will put you in the hospital.
Guidance counselor immediately.
There would be no pasty anything. We would be fighting. We would have an altercation right there. I will smack you with the popcorn. There's no other way for this to go. So, overall, though, I think just the humans in general were just filler. As far as like the other werewolves, which come into play later on in the series, they were pretty interesting. The whole, was it Leah and
Seth?
No.
Oh,
well, yes, Leah and the other love triangle.
Yeah.
Leah and the Jacob's pack leader and whoever his woman was. Yeah, it's Sam, yeah. So that whole thing was also a little bit weird. I understood it. I understood the whole imprinting thing, and I get that. I have problems with it, but I get it. I understand. I'm willing to accept it. I'm willing to suspend disbelief and be like, okay, this is a thing. It happens. Cool. This is how your universe works. But the angst that existed in this movie from almost all of the characters, but specifically everyone in the love triangle, it only told me that if I was a teenage boy, my thought process would be that being in love means being angsty about it all the freaking time. You have to feel, and if you don't feel like, if you don't stare out of the window while it is raining and think about life when you're in love with somebody, then you do not love them. And that is just, a crime. So I don't know. I felt like that was weird. I did like the Cullens. You guys touched on them enough. I didn't feel like I wanted to, go into it. I did think that the Vampire Council and all of them was great. I liked them. I always enjoy them. What's his name? The dude from Bad Omens. I'm drawing a blank on him. The guy who played Arrow, him. Good Omens, not Bad Omens, sorry. But I love him in everything that he does because I think he is genuinely hilarious, but also a fantastic actor. And so I loved him. Dakota Fanning's character was also very, very fun. I have trouble watching Dakota Fanning in things.
Really?
Not because she's bad. My first introduction to Dakota Fanning was Man on Fire. Yes, Man on Fire with Denzel Washington, where she gets kidnapped and he goes all Equalizer before he was the Equalizer to get her back. And every time I see her, I just envision that little girl being kidnapped. So I'm just like, I can't take you seriously as an imposing threat because you were like once taken by like the Mexican cartel. So like, you know, whatever. Where were those powers then? But no. But seriously, I think that, yeah. So overall, I think a lot of these characters could be great. I think the vampires were, in fact, probably the best characters in the story. Even Edward, believe it or not, I liked Edward to an extent. Like there were a lot of things about Edward I couldn't stand, but I definitely liked his backstory. I liked the idea that he was like, oh, he was so guilty he felt so guilty about, you know, killing people, even though the people he was killing were murderers. But he was still felt bad.
Bella has no problem with.
Right.
She tells him that.
Don't even get me started.
That's weird.
Including mine, where there's this weird thing about like murder is okay if you care about people. Okay, in my story, that's not true because in my story that there's accountability for these types of things. But in vampire stories in general, I'm a huge fan of the Vampire Diaries. But that is like a huge thing. People just be snapping necks left and right, and it's just like, this is cool. It's cool. Everything's fine.
It's fine. Everything is fine.
Exactly. That guy died. We murdered him. It's cool.
To be fair, Han Solo was like a mass murderer if you stop to think about it.
This is true. I think
in fiction it's normal.
Semantics.
Yeah.
I think in fiction it is normal to be a mass murderer and it'd be okay. But only in fiction. Only in fiction.
Only in fiction.
One brilliant do not. Yes, we do not. We do not support mass murder. But that being said, yes, I think that is all. It was all very interesting. I enjoyed all of those characters. But then I want to move on to plot structure in general. So the plot. Charles said it himself that the plot, especially for the first one, is very, very thin. I agree with this. My question is, do you guys feel that it was external conflict, i.e., the vampires? This is more throughout the entire thing, but vampires versus werewolves versus other vampires that drove the story? Or do you feel it was definitely more about Bella's choices and internal struggles that drove the story?
I feel like I'm going to say what I wanted it to be. What makes it a better story if I focus on it while watching is the external, the greater conflict in the world that they live in that Bella just ends up putting herself right smack dab in the middle of and not realizing that she put herself right smack dab in the middle of it. That is the conflict that makes it most interesting for me to focus on. I think that, again, like the teenage angst is everywhere. It's so hard to get through. I think I cringed so hard I actually had tears coming down my face at one point just because of the teenage angst. But I blame it on Jacob. But it was like, yeah, I don't think that Bella struggled internally very much. Because when she did, she was kind of just bemoaning the way things were. Because she had already made her choice. Even if there wasn't a reason that we understood why she made her choice, Edward was her choice. That was already a thing. There wasn't too much internal conflict for her, I feel like. There was internal conflict in Edward, which again is why I liked his character. I found his character interesting, at least. But I think it's more interesting to look at a story where your protagonist doesn't understand the world that they're getting into. And then they just end up in the middle of this huge battle between these two supernatural forces that have been going on for centuries. I think that's way more interesting.
Yeah, structurally, I'm going to be honest, it's really messy. Like, okay, so Bella wants Edward. And he's like, no, you have to be of age before you want to be a vampire. But like you said, Jalen, like, that's done. She picked them, and there's teenage angst. Then we throw in Jacob, who for some reason wants Bella, which I don't get. For the record, the Team Jacob, Team Edward thing does not exist. It doesn't make any sense. I don't get it. Moving on.
No.
But then
there shouldn't
you have those other vampires, the survivor ex-girlfriend who gets this other vampire who wants her, but she doesn't want him because she's using him to make an army of vampires to go kill Bella on the third one. But then there's the mafia vampires, and the mafia vampires have this other angle because ultimately the Don mafia vampire wants Alice because Alice can see the future. But then this also ties into high school graduation, but then also it's a lot of little different threads that don't really tie together a lot. And
too much like real life.
Yeah, and yet I would argue that I think real life has a little bit more tang to the whole element. So like angst, okay, so here's the thing. People who complain about angst, I feel, are two people. One, the poor teenagers who are living through the angst, so they don't really want to deal with it in their fiction. And two, the adults who refuse to grow up, so they go make fun of, like, when I was a kid, we had Saved by the Bell, and now these stupid shows out. And I'm like, dude, come on, man. Let's be honest, we all had our trash, that, whatever. But I think angst is a very legitimate storyline because when you're that age, you are crazy and you don't know what is what. You want a bunch of stuff, but it doesn't really play like that. And then there's a threat of the mafia, the vampire mafia, but it doesn't really feel like we're building to something. It all kind of feels random and thrown together, and that's why, without really getting into it right now, I feel like the whole ending of the story just ends because there's nowhere to go. It just kind of ran out of gas, and this is where the car stops. Even though, if you think about it, and it's not really hard to think about, the thread isn't even finished because they're immortal, so that's a whole thing. So again, it's like there's all these ideas that don't really get tackled for some reason in this. What, they're each 2 hours long, so it's like, what, 10 hours?
10 hours, yeah,
like a long time.
Jared is now regretting how he spent his
I just realized how I spent 10 hours of my life. Okay. Thank you for pointing that out. I appreciate it.
I think it really depends. I think that the first movie...
What do you think, Joe?
I despise the first movie, to be completely honest. And I feel like it's so separate from the rest of the series in the sense that there was no storyline. Like, the entire premise of the first movie is that Bella's trying to figure out, like, why this guy is so weird, and like he is weirdly obsessed with her. And I think it addresses a lot of themes of like obsession, which is interesting when you think about the audience that it's targeted towards. I don't know, it's definitely interesting to think about like what was their goal with that. The rest of the movies, I feel like it was all kind of building to that ending fight scene with the Volturi and the fact that their entire lives as the vampires and like everything that they experience, every choice that they make is controlled by this overarching, daunting presence that's like always there and always watching. And I think it's interesting, like Charles said, like how the end, there's nowhere to go from there. I think there's nowhere to go from there for the specific characters that we have been on this journey with. But as far as the vampires as a whole, I think, what was those two characters in the battle scene that just wanted to start a war with the Volturi to overthrow them? I can't remember their names.
Mm-hmm. Can't remember. I think one of them is played by Academy Award-winning Rami Malek. I can't remember, but apparently he's in these movies.
I think that they kind of, with one line, just kind of gave that purpose for the entire ending. And then, like, beyond that, when they said, like, they're still gonna control us, they're still gonna own us, like, nothing's solved by this. You just bought yourselves time, basically. And then it really frustrates me that all the other characters are like, meh, it's fine. It's tomorrow's problem, you know? But I don't know. I think that the way that things were set up, I don't like how they were executed. because there's so much more that like that where they touch on this little hint of something that could have been so fascinating, and then they just move on from it, and you get excited about there's a little bit of a storyline there, and then all of a sudden it's gone and you're just still here with these people that are all obsessed with each other in uncomfortable ways. So I don't know. I think there's so many ways that it could have been executed better for the potential that it had as a storyline.
Okay, I have a question. Has anybody or everybody or one of you seen Graduate?
It's on my watch list.
I know the gist, but no, unfortunately.
So this is not necessarily an answer to the question of plot or whatever, but it's my idea of what I think why they should not reboot, but create a sequel for Twilight. If you ever get a chance to watch the movie The Graduate, the movie's all about this guy who has an affair with his girlfriend's mom, and then ultimately decides it's not for him. Technically she's not really his girlfriend at the beginning. It's the girl that he wants to date, that he gets hooked up with, and his parents want him to see, and so he's like, whatever, fine, I'll see her. But he ends up having an affair with her mom, and then he ends up starting to like the daughter. And by the end, the daughter somewhere in the middle, the daughter finds out sorry about the spoilers, whatever. Now you don't need to watch it. But the daughter ultimately finds out about it and ends up going to get engaged and plans on getting married to this other guy. At the end of the movie, though, the main character bursts into the church and basically breaks up their wedding, and she runs away with him. And you would think that it's a wonderful ending. But the best part of the movie to me is at the very end when the credits roll and you see them, and they get on this bus, and they're in the back of the bus, and they're sitting there and they're smiling and the credits are rolling, and you think they're about to roll off into the sunset, but slowly the camera stays on them, and slowly the smile fades as they start to realize what they've done and what their life is going to be like after this whole thing. So you never really see what happens, but you as the viewer, if you're emotionally mature enough, or you're responsible, you're adult enough to realize that, like, one, marriage is a lot of work, and two, like, do you even like this person enough to have ripped them from a future that they could have had, and all of that. And so that's there. And my thought is, Bella, the entire time of this entire series, is told by everyone and their mother that Edward is a terrible person for her. Not a terrible person in general. Well, some people think he's a terrible person in general, but overall for her, he's not good for her. Jacob himself even says, I am exactly right for you. And that may not be the case. I don't know. But what I will say is that Edward was also not good for her. And for a lot of reasons, both as a human and otherwise. Side note, that whole stumbling through life thing as a kind of excuse for why she's clumsy is the stupidest shit I've ever heard in my life, and I want to sue for the fact that it exists. But that being said, I like the idea of the sequel being Bella and Edward realizing that eternity kind of sucks when you're with the person that you shouldn't actually be with. And having a kid with them makes it even worse. And I just think that would be so perfect fun, because the kids that grew up with the movie are now adults, and we, in that idealistic view that we had on what love means and what it means to be in love and all of that kind of stuff, is very different, hopefully, than it was when we first saw it, most of us. And so I think having Bella and Edward reflect that is kind of interesting as a concept. However, that doesn't really answer, as I said, that doesn't really answer the question that we're currently focusing on. That's just me, pitching a movie. But overall, I think that for me, I felt that it was definitely the internal struggle that drove the movie. Do I think that the way that it drove the movie was necessarily a good thing? I think that kind of was the problem, is that the internal struggle was the movie, because you took a high concept story and then you tried to make it into a character study, and that doesn't often work. That's not to say that it can't work, because there are films that does work, but it's very hard to take something that's high concept, that should be this is the movie we go to see during the summer to enjoy ourselves and not think. And you try to turn it into this thing where it's like, no, this is the movie where we want to make you feel and have like an emotional breakdown. And for, I think, teenage girls and boys, maybe they did. But for the rest of us, it was more like, I want to stab myself repeatedly watching this movie. And I feel like I would have more character growth in stabbing myself than I would watching this movie. So overall, though, I think that plot is definitely lacking, and I do think it was definitely driven by internal struggle. So I think for the listener, the key to decide early on what kind of story you want to tell. Like, do you want to tell a high concept story where it's a plot driven thing that's where it's like, oh yeah, vampires versus werewolves and, and people blowing stuff up, that kind of cool shit? Cool, do that. If you want to do something where we're like angsty and introspective and that kind of thing, do a character piece. But if you feel brave enough, do whatever you want, because again, at the end of the day, writing is not a sport. So at the end of the day, there are no statistics, there are no rules to this shit. You just kind of do it. And so if that's what you want to do, I just typically think that to tell a great story, you need to figure out where you want to go first and then go there. And this did not know where it wanted to go, and then became a science experiment gone wrong, and now here we are with it.
It almost tried to be too much and was too subtle in the subtle things it was trying to say, and then it just ended up being shallow and not hitting the mark in either place.
Yeah, and I was, to add to both of what you were saying, I was saying, I think what I find fascinating is that, of course, it's for teenagers, or young teenagers, and it's silly and ridiculous. And I find what's really fascinating is a ridiculous fairy tale story that has some teenage angst, that has ridiculous improbabilities that make no sense, that's all girly and fantastical, but good. That's called Sailor Moon. So I know it can be done. And I love Sailor Moon. Unfortunately, I don't have any merchandise on my desk right now to prove it, but I do love Sailor Moon. But the reason I bring that up is that I think it's interesting is that I think what Sailor Moon did right was knowing kind of what you guys are talking about, that we'll use a cooking metaphor here. If it was cooking with tomatoes, it knew it was just a store-bought tomato. Rather than, I think with this story, it was like, it's not just a store-bought tomato. It's from the farm from Wisconsin that Farmer Brown made. And you're like, who's Farmer Brown? And then you're starting talking about this, and you're like, what are you talking about? So basically, I think what's interesting is, it's a weird metaphor, sorry, again, not much sleep today. What I think you can take from the story is that you can throw in a love triangle with Jacob, but it has to make a little bit more sense. You can do it, just make sure that you're not going to throw the car over the cliff when you're driving into realms that you don't know where you're going. So again, weird metaphors today, but what I'm saying is it can be done.
I loved the tomato metaphor.
Yeah, me too. I want a Wisconsin tomato immediately.
But that is so good. Like, it's such an interesting, like, it's hard to describe, but there are some movies or TV shows that I've watched and I'm like, this would be really great, but I have a hard time getting behind this protagonist because I feel like they're taking them way too seriously. And this would be an awesome show, whether it's a drama or an action film or whatever it is. This would be awesome if the main if the writers just didn't take their character like so seriously.
The creators of Twilight maybe shot themselves in the foot a little bit with the character of Bella, because I feel like they tried to do that, but they made this character, like, I think they tried to make her like this quiet, mysterious, intriguing person, but they also tried to represent her as someone that, like you said, stumbling through life, but like she's kind of that person that's like out of step with what she's supposed to be in her group of people, and she feels really out of place. That's something that viewers can relate to, especially for the age group, the target audience, like in a high school, middle school setting. However, they kind of do a 180 where like that's the character they try to represent, yet everyone recognizes her and everyone's obsessed with her and wants her in their lives in some way, shape, or form. And I think that that's just hard you can't You can't do that to a character. Like, you can't set them up as this is how you're supposed to see them and then make a story about them being a completely different person.
That's a very
well
good point.
said. Thank you. You guys are saying words I've never been able to quite express with this. Also, I don't know what you said that clicked in my head, but this Netflix cartoon, anime, whatever they're doing. Here's an idea. You want Bella to be awkward? Modern day reboot. She doesn't do social media. She just can't figure it out. Done.
There you go.
Something that you can figure out right then and there.
Yep.
So, but not
Also,
having Bella be the center of everyone's world, I think would make it a million times more click in my brain.
For sure. For sure. Follow through. Consistency. Make sure that the way you set up the character to be presented is the way that they would be viewed in a real world situation. Also, side note, I feel like we need to apologize to all the teenagers because we're really dogging on teenagers in this episode. And it's not because we think y'all are stupid, it's just because we want that for you.
And we want you to hurry up and grow up.
I was
over it.
Just kidding.
You'd think Jared raised a teenager.
Hell, I have a niece. I have nieces and nephews, and they are all adults now. Well, not all of them. A few of them are still babies, actually, but most of them are now adults. But their teen years sucked.
I annoyed the heck out of myself as a teenager.
I don't like trauma.
No,
but I wasn't even in love with a vampire.
Yeah, exactly. I'm sorry.
I can't say anything.
No, I was a shitty teenager, so I can't even
saw these movies in the theater, so and that's not even like on the vicinity of my problems as a teenager. So
I was super Edward for a few years though, so like I was super obsessed with everything and angsty about everything, and just kind of like I can't, So I get it, I understand. Just hurry up and grow up. Anyway, so let's do some trivia. Let's do some trivia to break things up a little bit. We're gonna do a who said that.
No.
Thing. Okay, so
Charles and Jada are gonna sweep this.
We'll see. We will see. Okay, so who said I can't live in a world where Edward. You don't exist?
I want to say it's Jacob.
Anybody else?
I was gonna go with Edward, but now I'm second guessing Jacob.
You were all wrong. It was Bella that actually said that.
So here's an interesting idea. None of us could figure that out.
Yeah.
I see what you're saying, Charles.
Yeah.
You mean as in a lesson in storytelling?
In terms of a lesson, like maybe Bella could have said something slightly different. So like maybe Bella could say, I can't keep going without you in my life. Just kind of different wording. There's just an interesting example of how you can take little tidbits and tweak them, and then you get some different character steps, all about layers.
Sorry, go ahead.
Absolutely agree with that. In fact, I think even better.
Computer has a little bit of a delay.
Okay.
That line is really mature verbiage for someone who's supposed to be really young and awkward and angsty. And I think that's why it doesn't make sense for the character.
Agreed. I think to in line with Charles's thought, you could have even had her just say, you could have had her starting out by saying, I can't, and then trip down a flight of stairs, and we would have known exactly who it was, because she's the only person who's falling all over the place in the whole damn movie. So, okay. All right, let's see. Here's another one. No, I can't do that one because that one's way too easy. I feel like I already technically gave you guys the answer before.
Doesn't he own a shirt?
Huh?
Doesn't he own a shirt?
No, it wasn't that one. It was more the whole I'm exactly right for you, Bella one. But, okay. And so the lion fell in love with the lamb. Who? Yes. Okay.
Also,
by the line, Jared.
Super creepy thing to say to your significant other, but
I mean, I might know it, but I don't know. He says several creepy things to her in that first movie that are just like, and then her reaction to it is what's really weird. Like, he's like, I want to kill you. Every part of me wants to kill you. And she's just like, it doesn't scare me. I still want you. And I'm like, what are you, crazy? What? They did not have ID discovery when you were alive? Like, this is a true crime story. Anyway. I'm sorry.
I think the response is stupid lamb, and then he says, or a sick masochistic
and that does bring up an interesting point. I kind of,
bonus points to Charles. Bonus points to Charles.
I realized that Edward kind of hated what he was. He hated vampires until Bella was one. And I think that that's kind of an interesting, again, it's a subtle thing that they could have played into a whole lot more.
Yeah, I agree. That's a really good point.
Okay, here's we got two more. One, I'm betting on Alice. It's not a lot to go on, but
see, the thing is, everyone had a very good reason to say this in every single film.
It is not a main character, if that narrows it down for you.
Was it Jasper?
No.
Carlisle.
No.
Darn.
Right.
Emmett.
Yes, it was Emmett.
Okay.
That was going to be my second guess.
All right. Here's the last of our trivia questions before we jump into the would you rathers. Do I dazzle you?
I thought you were asking me this question, Jared.
That was a lie. That was actually a piece of dialogue somebody said. Did somebody guess? I'm sorry.
No, not yet. But I feel like if we're going on cringe, it's got to be Edward.
Nice, you got it. You got it.
I was gonna say Alice because my young teenage self like totally had a thing for her, the short hair look, that whole thing.
Alice was definitely the best character.
Stephenie Meyer bedazzled all of her vampires, so that makes complete sense to me. That's another problem that I have with these vampires, is that whole glistening diamond shiny shit is ridiculous.
I have an interesting point to that.
What do you think?
Okay, so when I first saw these movies, and this was like Obama had just started office or something. Okay, it was a long arse time ago. But I was like, oh, is he going to turn into like a giant bat creature? And then he does the thing. It's like, I'm shiny. And of course, this got eaten up by a bunch of stupid people from like, you know, let's beat the joke to death to the more nastier, that's really gay, you know, blah, 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 blah. Real bad stuff. 2010s, everyone. But my personal issue with it. So first of all, honestly, I just think they should just burn up and be done with it. Like, why break a good formula? But here's my thing. There's no consequence. So what? He shines diamond. I don't think that's going to freak anyone out. Or maybe that was the way the film presented it. Maybe in the imagination of the book, it's more freaky-ish, to be fair. But I think that's kind of my issue, is that it's like, I can't get in the sun or this happens. And I just don't think there's a really strong consequence. That's always kind of been my issue with that. So if he turned into like a giant bat creature, first of all, that'd be boss as hell. But two, I think it would have more of a consequence, a challenge to their relationship. I don't think him shining on his skin is all that challenging. My take as someone who listened to audiobook of the first book years ago.
Sorry.
So yeah.
That's the weird thing about it. It's because like I felt like
I think that again, that's another great example of like they had the start of something good there and then they just didn't follow through with it, because I think the consequence was that it disconnects them even more from the world that they're a part of, because it's like they're trying to not be discovered, they're trying to not be known, so it takes away a huge part of the experience of living, and then they're forced to just live forever in this torture of like living but not living and not actually experiencing life or being a part of the world that they live in. Because I mean, they can't go out in the sun, so anytime like they have to forever live in the rain and the clouds and overcast in the dark. And I mean, personally, I would get so sad. I cannot there's no way. But I don't know, I think that is the consequence, but again, it's so subtle. They really could have played into it more and made it more clear.
Yeah, I think that's a better point, especially from stuff I've heard from like my sister and stuff like that. I think that's the most balanced perspective on that.
I feel like, I don't know, I feel like the Edward goes on this whole thing in the first movie where he explains to Bella when they do that really weird, crazy camera angle thing where they're like coming around and like panning and doing all this weird shit, and I'm just like, why just stay where you are? Like, I don't, are we like, what, who are we like, I don't understand. Were we supposed to be like squirrels and like watching this happen from a distance? I don't understand what was going on. But when he's explaining that to her, he's like, he tells her all this shit about vampires, and he's like, how like, you know, as if you would, as you know, everything about me draws you in, and then as if that would even matter because you aren't fast enough, you're not strong enough, and he's like going down this laundry list of why it's so fucking cool to be a vampire, but then he's like, I hate being a vampire, and I was like, To me, it's like, you sound like the kid who got everything he wanted for Christmas, but he didn't get the red truck, so now he's mad about it. And I was just like, this is so stupid. I was like, if I was a vampire, yeah, okay, I can't go out in the sun in front of people. Cool, whatever. I'll just be a creature of the night like vampires are meant to be anyway. That's fine. And if I have to go out in the sun, I'll buy a farm and I'll live out on a farm and I'll spend some time on my own little land and be done with it. Other than that, though, I don't see a whole lot of drawbacks to being a vampire. Like, if I don't want to live alone, I'll just turn people and I'll create my own little community of vampires and call it a day. Like, there was, like when you watch, for instance, that's true. Sorry, but besides the murdering part, but when you think about like Interview with the Vampire and the Vampire Chronicles and stuff like that versus this. And I know that's oftentimes a comparison that's made, and it's an unfair comparison because it is for two very different audiences. But when you think about when Lestat and Louis and all of them talk about the curse of being a vampire, I believe it. I believe it. I believe the idea of an unending eternity and loneliness and all of these other things that come with it. And I guess you could say that would be the same for Twilight. But the thing about Twilight is every single vampire we meet in that universe is a part of some kind of family or group or community. You rarely ever see any vampire that's just on their own, just chilling and hanging out. So it's like, why are you're not really lonely. You can build a community. You can do that. In the Vampire Chronicles, it's like there were actually lonely vampires who were tired and depressed and sick of their existence. And they were always dealing with like this existential stuff. And I would imagine that immortality would bring a lot of existential thoughts and stuff like that, because it's kind of like, well, what am I? And what is my purpose? And I understand that. I think that makes a lot of sense. But overall, the idea and the consequence of being a vampire doesn't ring as all that bad in the Twilight universe. It's kind of just like, I don't know. I felt like they could have made that more interesting. I think it would have been better if the Cullens just kind of fucking hated each other and they were kind of stuck together. I think that would have made it more interesting if the Cullens were like a dysfunctional family that had no choice but to remain together, but they couldn't stand each other. Then it'd be
what
like,
you're
okay,
talking
yeah,
about is what we do in the shadows, actually.
Yeah, well, that works though. You know what I mean? You would understand why it would suck, or like, if it did boil down to like, oh no, I could be staked and I could, turn to ash, not I'm a Coca-Cola bottle and you can just smash me whenever you want to if you're strong enough. So I don't know. Weird, but it's cool. That being said, would you rather? Now, all of these questions take place within the Twilight universe. These are not questions that go outside of the universe. So, first one, would you rather be a vampire or a werewolf? And I know that I just ran down the vampire. Disregard everything I said. And just, what would you rather do?
Wolf, easily, because in this one I can turn to wolf anytime, and then I can be a cuddly boy wolf anytime. Moving on. Because the vampires always come with like these little...
If there was a way...
There's always like a
I don't know, keep like... okay, I'm in charge of the editing, so I am going to clip up that moment where Charles just said, I want to be a cuddly boy, and I'm going to listen to that forever, because that was the most adorable and hilarious thing I've ever heard. I love that. That's got to be. Oh man, that is peak podcast. That is easily at the end of the year. That's got to be one of the top statements that were made this season. Thank you, Charles. Thank you for that contribution.
I hate the cold with the pack.
Anyway, sorry.
So I could not be a vampire.
Who is next?
I absolutely hate impulsive and territorial males. They scare me. The impulsiveness and the hot-blooded wolves would scare me a lot. So I feel like I'd have to choose vampire. And also, I could finally run without dying after 2 steps.
Okay, fair enough. That is a wonderful argument.
Part of my choice was also to do with running too. So there's like a dream of wanting to run without dying.
I also wouldn't want everyone else's voices in my head, though.
I forgot that was a thing.
But wait, isn't that like a gift of specific vampires? Because I got the impression that Edward was the only one that could do that.
No,
yeah, that's true.
The pack is like a unimind, because there's that actually generally...
Yeah, that too.
Funny joke where it's like, oh, when is Bella going to call? And they're all making fun of him, which I think is genuinely funny, by the way.
Yes, it was.
I think anybody who knows me knows my answer, but I would definitely be a vampire. I would hate the fact that I was sparkly.
Charles can be a cuddly little boy. You can be a sparkly boy.
Charles would be the cuddly boy, and I'd be sparkly.
Boy.
And I'm just going to rot on my farm in the middle of nowhere where I don't have to see anyone for all of eternity.
Yeah, I would love to be a vampire. I would just love it. Like, if that's my wish for Christmas of 2025, let me be a vampire. Just don't give me anything else. If you guys can, I don't know, come up with the serum for vampirism between now and then, I would appreciate it. And that would be all I need forever. Literally, forever. That and that would be the only drawback to all of that would be the mass murder part. So I admit that. I put that out there now. I will not kill people. I will not go as far to say that I would be a vegetarian because that annoys me. The whole I'm going to only eat animals and therefore I'm a vegetarian is the stupidest thing I've ever heard in my life. I get the sentiment. I do. It's stupid. It's just stupid. I like animals too, so I don't want to. Like, I like animals more than I like humans, so I think that's an easy choice for me. But
that's fair.
Okay, so let's see. Would you rather hang out with Rosalie or Alice?
Alice.
I already know the answer to this, but I'm going to ask it anyway.
It's Alice. She's fun. She's adorable. She was like a high school fictional minor crush of mine. Not major, but a little bit. Alice, easily. This is a stupid question. I'm sorry.
100%.
I knew it. I knew it was.
But I think it's because I...
Yours too, Jada? Alice as well?
Optimism in my life.
I guess I'm the odd man out. I'm the odd man out because I would pick Rosalie. One, because I felt bad for Rosalie the entire movie. And I feel like she needed somebody to hang out with her. So I would be the one to hang out with her. Because I know it seems like she has a good heart and she has good intentions. She's kind of suffering from that Edward, like, why would you want to be a vampire thing, even though everything about being a vampire sounds like it would be fucking awesome. But like, I don't know. I don't know. It's like that thing where it's like if I was to give you a gooey, delicious slice of pizza and tell you about how great pizza is and then be like all angsty about pizza and why you shouldn't have pizza and why you're sick for wanting pizza. It's the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my life. Don't make it sound good if you don't want me to be it. I'm sorry.
I was going to go back to tying in. That is another example of you have to have follow through and consistency with
also has to
how
do with how
you
the
portray something and how you want it to be viewed.
Being a vampire in general, because I think the creators wanted you to believe that they hated their existence because they hated what they were. It's like you're created to be this like person that draws people in, and it's supposed to be awesome, but the characters that are experiencing this life despise it. And I think, again, that's something that they tried and they missed a little bit on that.
I agree with that. Okay, 2 more questions.
Hang on, Charles was going to say something.
Oh, yeah, sorry. I was just going to say, she's also the only one who tells Bella to her face, I don't particularly like you, which makes her like kind of like you. But I also think that is an interesting point. That's partially a joke, but also the more serious end is there is someone who doesn't like Bella, and there is some kind of tension there. So voila, tension. So there you go.
Tension's good. All right, here's one. Would you rather save Bella and Edward's relationship or Bella and Jacob's? Essentially, are you Team Edward or are you Team Jacob?
I was waiting for this question, even though it shouldn't be a question.
It's Team
screw
Edward.
Jacob entirely.
Jacob is not. Jacob's not a good character.
So offended.
He's just this weird dude, and I don't get it. No, it's Team Edward. There's another
Team Edward.
Shout out. There's by the way a hilarious video. There was a trailer for this Final Fantasy game that had this character going chaos, right? So there was this guy who did this parody about making fun of chaos, and one of the jokes he did was chaos is Team Edward, but I haven't seen Twilight yet, so I don't know if I'll agree. And I quote this like all the time. It's the funniest thing in the world. I had to throw that out there because I adore this joke.
That's awesome.
Disagree with all of you.
No.
I love
See this?
Jacob.
See this?
I love him.
This is the
I was a teenage girl. And hold on, I'm rethinking saying this because this is a recorded podcast and there will be a record. But if I was a teenage girl, Jacob would certainly be my guy. And there are so many reasons for it, but specifically, Jacob to me, I identified with Jacob when I first saw this. I identified with Jacob because I always thought, I get it. I get being the guy on the outside, knowing that the guy that the girl that I like is with is not very good for her. He's kind of a dick, and I feel like I could be better. And I got that. I understood that. And I thought I thought, oh, that's what, an 18-year-old guy's gonna, actually, I think I was like 20 when I first saw it, but like a 20-year-old guy is going to be like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. Now, years later, I see it differently. I see Jacob as more of I still see him as who's better for Bella long overall, in the sense of what Bella could have, what Bella could want, what Bella. I agree. The one goated line that Bella has is the whole, it's a choice between who I should be and who I want to be, in essence. I'm paraphrasing. And I always got that. And the level of agency that the character had in that moment of being able to choose who she was and what she was going to be. And I love the idea of, this is a character who, I don't like the character, but I love the idea that this is a character who, especially being a woman, is living in a world where everybody is telling her who she can and can't be, what she should and shouldn't have, and how that reflects the real world. Women are constantly told how they should be, what they should be doing, whatever. And this woman chooses what she wants, regardless of what everyone else thinks. And I admire that. Jacob is the safe choice. And on one hand, I'm kind of talking myself out of Jacob a lot in this comment as I talk through you guys, but I recognize that. Nonetheless, I realize that Jacob is the safe choice. And in that, though, it's still good for her. It was still good for her. And I just liked him as a character, as a person. I felt he was more relatable than Edward. He also felt less insufferable than Edward did.
I disagree with that.
To me, he did. Because to me, I felt like Edward was just, not that Jacob wasn't dramatic, not that Jacob wasn't like just a little bit toxic, especially though that moment when they were in the.
He's so toxic he can break through cement.
Yeah, that moment where they're in the tent, and then he's like warming her up, and then he's like, "Oh, you'd be warmer if you took your clothes off." I died so hard at that. I died that every single time because I'm like, you were such a dick. That is hilarious. But overall, I'm not saying he's not toxic, but I always felt he was more. I felt his humanity more than I felt Edward's. And I know that obviously Edward's not a human, so that makes sense. But the thing about vampires is, because, we always say, oh, they're vampires, they lose their humanity, they're not human, but they started out that way. So there are always going to be traces of humanity in them. I never felt the trace of humanity in Edward, ever. And feeling guilty about the fact that you kill people doesn't necessarily make you human. It just makes you not an asshole. But that being said, I just felt like Jacob was more human and relatable, and he felt more like a real character to me. He felt more believable to me than Edward did. Because again, I'm also I get really angry about vampire characters that are teenagers who act like teenagers. Because it's like you're 100 some odd years old and you're still locked in the mentality of, I'm going to act like a 17-year-old boy. You probably dated, even though he says, I didn't have any women before you. Bullshit. I doubt that. I highly doubt it. But it's fine. Whatever. Who am I to judge? But that idea of like, oh, you've never had another relationship, and even if you didn't, you've seen mature relationships in Carlisle and Esme. You've seen Alice and Jasper and Rosalie and Emmett. You've seen relationships. You see what a healthy, mature relationship looks like, and then you do this with this 17-year-old girl, and it's like, oh yeah, okay, this makes sense. Jacob is a teenage boy. He's behaving like a teenage boy, and it makes sense for him to behave that way. And then he becomes a mature wolf that, listen, I mean, for his werewolf behaviors. But, anyway, I would save Bella and Jacob. Though Eclipse pissed me off with that whole Jacob kissed me thing because it was the stupidest shit. I was so mad. I remember being so excited about it when I first saw it. I was like, yeah, they're going to get together. This is going to be a Jacob thing. This is going to be awesome. And then she walked back and was just like, I did what I had to do, but let's go. We're still together. And I was like, and then Edwards is just like, cool, I'm cool with that. And I was like, this is not real. This isn't real.
Yeah,
nobody's doing that. No, you didn't just leave me up here in this cold mountain and go kiss another man and then come back to me and be like, let's go to the war. I'm not going to the war. You can go die now. No.
Yes. No, that was for sure my least favorite part, and that is why I think that scene is probably why. It's the culmination of why I despise Jacob even being a factor in a love triangle.
They wasted him. I feel they wasted him. They should have given him a movie. Not that bullshit of like him helping her through the breakup, and then she's like, I'm falling for you, but I'm not going to admit that I'm falling for you. Breakup crap. I mean, give him a real movie where he's actually on the same playing field as Edward. And then it would have been like, oh, this is engaging. This is interesting because what's going to happen? This was all like, I'm going to help you through this breakup. And then your boyfriend's going to come back after like leaving you. And then the other thing, okay, sorry, but
tangents.
I'm sorry. I know. I'm sorry. This is my last one, I promise. But at the beginning of New Moon, where they start off with her sleeping next to the Romeo and Juliet book, right? And then they watch the Romeo and Juliet in the class, and Edward makes the comment about how it is the stupidest the choices that they made were so stupid, then proceeds to make the very same decision at the end of the movie. And this 100-year-old vampire who has been around forever does not see the irony and the stupidity of what he is doing. It makes no sense to me. I was like, who wrote this? Why? You're
That's
fired.
fair.
You mentioned something
fair. I will give you that.
The scene
I promised I'd be not
in the
as mean,
tent.
but
Between
somebody wrote
that
that,
conversation
and that's
between
upsetting.
Edward and Jacob, I think that showcased a huge difference in their characters, because there was that whole moment where Edward was like, I forget what he said, but like, if we weren't natural enemies and whatever else, then I might actually like you. And then Jacob basically just insulted him and was like, nah, I still wouldn't like you. I think that shows a huge difference in the maturity between, like, yes, in the maturity of their characters, but like also the age difference. Like, yes, they're the same age, but Edward's been alive for so much longer. And he's, had times to come to terms with these feelings of like reconciling with people and like having beef with them without hating them as a person. Whereas Jacob is very much in his angsty teenage era where he's like, but I like this girl, so naturally I hate you.
Forever.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, so before we jump, we're going to jump into the marketing section questions. But there was a question about Renesmee and EJ as a which one did you prefer? But I don't even want to. I don't even. But I feel like there will be no other time to discuss it than this moment. So I want to talk about Renesmee for a second.
That's
Charles,
the baby, isn't it?
Let's talk about the baby.
I always forget that it's called Renesmee.
We have to talk about this baby because this baby existed, and somebody called that cinema, and somebody signed off on that and said that was okay. And I feel wronged by that. And I think you told me you had thoughts on it, and I want to know your thoughts on it. I want to know all of your thoughts on it, but I have thoughts, and they are not kind. I will say that now.
I don't get the baby name at all. I really, really don't. I think her getting pregnant and having a consequence, I think, is interesting. I think the child isn't safe by the end of the story, which we've already discussed. I don't really remember much about this kid, to be honest. But the story, I'm pretty sure I'm correct. And I've seen the pictures, so again, I think I'm correct. But apparently the baby was originally an animatronic, and it was cursed. It kept biting people. So that's why they replaced it with this creepy arse CGI. But the doll, I've seen the pictures, was scarier than the CGI. And it bit people. Like, actually bit
but very on brand.
That wasn't safe for their teenage audience.
This blows my mind, and this is why I love the series. Yeah,
that's fair. That's fair.
At least it did its job. That makes sense. What else did you guys? Did you guys? Did either of you like the baby angle, the storyline, as well as the baby itself?
I will agree with Charles that her getting pregnant as a consequence is probably the best thing that movie did as far as teaching life lessons. I will actually say that I really loved the name Renee, and I still do. I liked how it was honoring to both mothers, but I'm also sappy that way.
I mean, yeah, technically Renee would have done it as well. Just Renee would have technically done the same thing.
But I feel like everyone's named Renee, so maybe again, like that's just me, and I'm willing to accept that I am wrong about my opinions.
Your opinion's your opinion. You're entitled to it. It's totally fine. It's wrong, but I'm just kidding. No.
See, that's what I'm accepting. I actually I liked the character development that the baby caused in everyone else, but I did not feel comfy with Jacob imprinting on her whatsoever.
Okay. I have a thought about this. So I saw this in the theater, and he falls to his knees, and I go, oh, he wants to protect her, the baby, like a godfather. Oh, okay, that's kind of nice. Walk out of the theater, blah, 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 blah. And everyone goes, he wants to screw the baby. And I was like, yeah, what? Everyone's like, he wants to bang the baby. And I'm like, he does? And I guess that's because I was completely a different interpretation.
You were too pure for the audience.
I thought it was about that. And I was like, okay, weird. So in my head, it's always that he was going to protect this baby, and that like the imprinting was not romantic, it was something else. But I'm stupid, I have no idea. But that's my
I think Charles is just the only one who was pure enough for this movie,
that like this is purely like a protection, like big
he was
brother
high intelligence
type of,
though,
like, you know. But I think the audience just joked about it and then took it in a completely different direction.
Yeah, it's weird.
But I mean, honestly though, technically the film did kind of, I can see why the audience did it, because the film, even I thought that at first, because when he describes what imprinting is, he's talking to Bella and he's describing it in a way that makes it seem like if he was to imprint on her, he would be in love with her and she would hold him to the ground. And well, that sounds weird, but she would like, sorry.
And
she
would like, no sex life, room reference.
Sorry. But I meant like she would like be his reason for living, and like the way that they set it up, they framed it in a romantic way. And then they tried to flip it on us later on as like, no, this is not a romantic thing. It doesn't have to be a romantic. And then every other instance where we saw it, it was a romantic. Well, we only really saw it one other time, and in that sense, it was also a romantic.
I think they added a line.
I think that's like
when he did imprint on Renesmee, they took that clip of like when he was describing imprinting to Bella, but they added in a whole like you'd be whatever they need, a friend, a brother. I'm like, okay, wait a second.
Yeah, that makes sense. yeah. I think they had to do that, because I think they knew that they had framed it this entire series as kind of a romantic gesture. So it was like, oh, when he did it to the baby, it was like, if you didn't catch that one line, your automatic thought was, so yeah, he wants to date. He's gonna date the baby. That's what's gonna happen, and that's gross. But like, that's where it went. So I get that. Has anybody here ever played the game Second Life?
No, but I kind of want to, because the name sounds really fun.
You don't. It's toxic.
Okay.
No, it's Second Life is like this. It's this massive. I want to say it's an MMO kind of game, where you can be anything you want, be whoever you want, whatever. But the people there are not great. But anyway, they have this thing called a Zuby baby, right? And so Zuby babies are like, if you date somebody in Second Life and you guys decide to do, you can have a baby. And if you go through the whole like pregnancy thing, this baby comes out, and the baby is like a baby, but the face is like, it's like they took an image of a baby's face and they put it on the baby's face. And I cannot watch this movie without thinking that this baby looks like a Zuby baby. And it's the most terrifying thing ever. Like, I'm just like, it looks like almost like a Sims IMVU Second Life amalgamation of animated baby. And I'm like, the entire time, I'm like, why didn't they just get a real baby? Like, nobody was just like, I'm going to bring my baby in and you guys can just use the baby until, for like countless movies before it have had babies. And then you had a different actor play the baby when they get older. And you have a different actor play the baby when they're a teenager, and works just fine. No problem. We don't need to do this digital baby thing and then age this baby up digitally and then make it a digital teenager.
Imagine digital AI baby.
That'll be the sequel. That'll happen in the sequel.
Good night, everybody. That's all my material.
But it was just so bad, and it was like, it was supposed to have expressions, and it was like, I love you, mommy, with the face, and I was just like, how can you love that thing? I don't want to love that thing. No. Give it to the wolves. Give it to the wolves. When the wolves came to eat it, just give it to them. It doesn't need to be here. And I felt so bad because I know everybody was like, Resume is so cute and it's so adorable, and this is like, the happy couple and their happy family, and all I can think about is your baby is ugly and it's not real, and it makes me mad.
No, sorry.
Honestly, I kind of have a hard.
I think that since it's a like vampire baby, they were trying to make it not look real, but that's another area where they tried and they just missed by a long shot, because it's just really unfortunate how that turned out, actually.
So badly.
They flew too close to the sun, where they were so good at the CGI in every other aspect of this movie, and they just flew too close to the sun and thought that they could make a beautiful CGI baby.
They threw the baby into the sun, Jalen. Threw it into the sun. This was horrible. I have nightmares about this baby. I cannot tell you enough. And I forgot how much I hated the baby until I watched it this time. And I was just, when I saw it, when it first came out, and they showed the baby, and like they turn it to the camera and it's there, I was like, what is that? What is that? Put it back. I was like, no, I don't want to see it anymore. And it was, oh my God. I hate that baby.
To be fair, no baby comes out looking like an adorable human. Every baby comes out looking ugly, and you really need the hormones of a mother in order to love it.
Very true. Very true. But that was a demon. I don't care what anyone says. That was not. Who did that? Like, who did it? I want them fired immediately. Like, I don't understand. I don't get it. Like, it's my greatest regret about watching this movie is that if I could deal with everything else, but the fact that I had to see that for as long as I had to see it, and then when she grew up and she was like still looking like that, and I was like, is that a real person? Is that like an actor, or is that like a digital thing that they made? I don't know. I don't like it. I want it to stop happening, and it just kept unfolding until the end of the movie, and I was glad that she wasn't safe in the end, because I was like, I hope that they kill her. I hope somebody just comes back and kills her, because she doesn't need to be here. She doesn't. I'm sorry.
This is my perspective, my sin of comparison as a woman. I thought that she was just too perfect and too pretty, like when she grew up. Maybe this is just, it's my perspective of like, you just compare yourself as inferior to anyone else.
That's fair. It's like the movie The Uglies. Have you guys seen that?
No.
I know.
The movie The Uglies, at the end where I'm not have time to go into what it's about, but at the end she's like, the whole movie is about becoming perfect and in the pursuit of perfection. And at the end of the movie they have her, she's already beautiful throughout the whole movie, but then for some reason they put her through the machine, and then she comes out as like crazy perfect, the idea of what perfect looks like. And so I feel you on that sense. I still didn't see her as perfect, but that's cool. I'm the odd man out because I've heard a lot of people say, the baby was cute. It was a cute baby. Renesmee, I've heard people say Renesmee saved the movie.
I think it was less about the looks and more really about how they made her kind of like sweet and likable. And I mean, she made everyone that she met like kind of fall in love with this little kid. Like, she's just so she sees everyone as equal. She doesn't hate everyone. Like even that scene where she meets Arrow, like she treats him the same as everyone else. I think is that they tried to make her character lovable. The looks, there's controversy on that. I think that the idea and the concept of Renesmee set up both the conflict for the last few movies, but also those cousins that like randomly appear at the wedding and we're like, okay, why are we meeting these characters and you don't know anything about them and they kind of act kind of weird. I think that the backstory with the like immortal children, like that whole concept really sets the scene for not only developing those characters, but also creating a follow-up storyline for the last movie.
That makes sense. I agree with that. I think, and the way you described what her character was and how she was making people, love her, I could see that. It was very difficult for me to focus on anything related to her positively because I couldn't get past the way that she looked. Every scene that she was in, I kind of just checked out and like got on TikTok and was just like, no, I'm not doing this.
Twilight has traumatized Jared in so many ways. I am so sorry that we all insisted on this episode.
No, it's fine because I've been waiting to talk about this in a public forum for a long time. So now I'm able to, and no one can turn off my mic, so it is fine. No, but okay, great. So let's talk about marketing, and then I'm going to let you guys get out of here because we've gone. But you know what? That's cool. We should have known. You should have known it was going to be a long episode because we're talking about an entire saga, and it's Twilight, and there's a lot to be said.
Yeah.
Good or bad, there's a lot to be said about this. But how do you feel Twilight target? How did Twilight target and grow its core audience so effectively? How do you guys feel that they did that? Specifically for the movies.
Sorry, again.
Team Edward, Team Jacob.
I thought the marketing and aesthetic part of it is what they did the strongest. And if you think about like even just the coloring and the lighting and the mood that they set, like there's filters designed after the lighting and coloring and you see it, you immediately know, oh, that's Twilight. Like, and then I think that they very much leaned into that energy that like any attention is good attention. So all of the jokes and controversy, I think they really embraced that. And it was supposed to almost be cringy because it turns heads. It gets attention, whether positive or negative, you're still getting views. And I mean, even to this day, like you hear people make comments like jokes and you immediately think of Twilight, like you immediately know. I think it's been the longest lasting, like, at least for me personally, that I've seen, like the most well-known, long-lasting. It's still just as popular today as the day that it came out. It's just got a very different energy about it because now people make jokes about it. Now people like, there's a whole different type of energy as opposed to that whole group of obsessed teenagers. So I think that they embraced every stage of their film, and from a marketing standpoint, I think is very genius.
It was the teenage fad that lasted multiple generations and wasn't specific to just one generation.
I think what they did is basically they made it feel important and they stuck to it. So like, I could be wrong, but I swear to you, that first Venom movie was supposed to be serious. Right? That was all the marketing. It was going to be like a werewolf movie. And then everyone said, oh, it's so goofy. And they went, well, that's what we always wanted. So then 2 and 3 were these goofy, weird movies. But in the back of my brain, I'm like, I call your bluff and raise you. But with Twilight, it was always just the most sincere, epic love story thing. Didn't matter who, are you Team Edward? Are you Team Jacob? Everyone hype up the machine because it was really important, and they stuck to that and it actually worked, which is interesting in retrospect because like last year because it's 2025 now, but 2023 was Barbie, which was like the biggest movie ever, and then 2024 was Wicked, which is still making like a bunch of money. So it's an interesting time. Like back then I feel like there weren't really a lot of movies like that. Like, yeah, you had Notebook sometimes and you were never going to get another Titanic, ever again. You still haven't got another Titanic. So it's kind of was different. Like this was the almost like an alternative choice that you could see rather than some, I don't know, X-Men Origins, Wolverine, or whatever it was in 2009. So I think that's what they did, is they stuck to their guns and said, this is serious. I don't care what anyone else says. I'm just...
Yeah. No, I'm still thinking. Go for it.
I was going to say that I think that this is a key lesson, I think, for the listeners. And I know that me personally, I've abandoned you part of this episode to rant about Twilight. So that was bound to happen, and it will happen again, I promise. Not in this particular episode, but it will happen in future episodes. But I think one of the things that the listeners can learn, too, when marketing a book or film or whatever it is you're marketing is knowing your audience. I think the people who marketed this story knew exactly who they were aiming for, because I can promise you that there was no 40-year-old man with good intent, anyway, that was walking around and saw anything Twilight related and was like, I gotta go and see that. Unless maybe he was a critic, or like I said, he had bad intent. They knew teenage girls specifically were going to love it. They knew that their parents would bring them to see it, similar to the way that Barbie works, similar to the way that Wicked has worked, which is interesting that Charles mentioned those films. Same thing. Same as the way Moana worked. It's one of those things where you target the target audience as the kid, but then it's like what they always say about like toy commercials. It's like when you see them, you think, oh, the target audience is the kid. The real target audience is the parent, because the parent is the one with the money. And so it's why in those toy commercials you always see the parents are so happy because the kid is busy doing whatever it is that they're doing. And they're like, oh, I want my kid to shut up for a few hours. I'll go buy that kind of thing. And so I think with movies, it's the same way. You target the parents, and this is a cool way for me to spend time with my teenage child who hates me 24/7. And this is the moment where we'll have some quality time. And so when my teenage daughter is going crazy over this thing, it is Team Edward and Team Bella, and I have no idea what this is, but I want to go and see it because it's important to them, and targeting them in that way was really, really smart. So I think when you write your novel or you plan on releasing your film, know exactly, I think it's actually important to know it even before you start writing it. Who do you want this to be for? That can change. You don't have to be beholden to it, because like when I started writing mine, who I thought I wanted the story to go out to is completely different than who I want it to go out to now. And that's okay. But I have an idea of it, because when you start to market it, when you start to plan it, you'll know exactly what kind of stuff is going to catch their attention, what kind of stuff is going to make them say, oh, I'll buy that. And of course, our level of marketing budgets are a lot lower than the people who made Twilight. You know, these are studio budgets where they have hundreds of millions of dollars to throw into what they want to do. But you don't have to have hundreds of millions of dollars to know who your target audience is. Go where they hang out and tell them about your thing. And so I think that that's something we always have to keep in mind when creating our stories is, who am I writing this for? And what is the goal of that thing? And I think Twilight managed to do that very, very, very well. No, there's like no caveats to that sentence at all.
Also, on that note about advertising, here's a fun fact. One of the books on that shelf is called Harold, the Illegitimate Son of God. And I found out this book because the author did a jokey hip-hop rap about the book of him in a bookstore, just a trailer of him rapping about what the book was. And I said, well, that's got to be interesting. I bought it, read it, dug it, and still on my shelf. So there you go. It can be just as simple as that.
I feel like Twilight is, the entire saga is a very good example of branding. They branded their material with a specific look, with a specific sound. I think we can agree that the soundtrack was very masterful, regardless of what the storyline was.
So gosh dang good.
Good soundtrack.
Amazing.
I can still sing these songs.
So I feel like the branding, as Jada said, the mood, the tone, the coloring. I mean, it was really interesting for me to hear from Jada's perspective, because Jada, you are an artist. You're a graphic designer, you're a photographer, so all these color things, these fine details of aesthetic, you're very well versed in. And so for me, it was interesting to hear that perspective and to appreciate that perspective when I was just looking for, well, these characters annoy me and this storyline is stupid, so I don't have any. I did have appreciation for the CGI wolves. I will say that. But I think when you do branding well and you make your movie recognizable, it immediately feels familiar to people and it makes them feel comforted. So it's almost like a comforting familiarity. Like a lot of people that I know that still enjoy Twilight watch it as a comfort movie just because it gives them a certain mood, regardless of whether the story is good or not, regardless of whether the characters are interesting or not. They're watching it because it feels familiar, because the advertising did such a good job at giving it a mood that it shares with you, that you feel comfortable with. So that is just an interesting note on the importance of branding. And when you do it well, you can still be successful and cover a lot of other things.
When I first watched it, I think I told you that. I was like, I feel like I've seen this before, even though like I haven't clearly. But it's just such a recognizable aesthetic and feel. But along that line, I was actually talking with my boyfriend recently, and he made a really interesting point. And he was like, I think that Twilight ruined vampires for any other, like the entire idea of them in general, because any other person that tries to make a piece of media, a book, a TV show, a movie, whatever, immediately your brain goes to Twilight when vampires or werewolves are mentioned. And I think that makes it really hard for an entire genre to establish themselves separately from that without preconceived like ideals.
I agree with that. And I can see how that's the case. It's to be honest, it was the reason why I hesitated to write a vampire story for a really long time, because I always was like, oh, everybody's just going to think Twilight and it's going to be shit. I've come to the realization that that's far from true as far as what people accept and people won't. I do know that there is a considerable amount of threads of people that are like, give me some vampire book selections that are not like Twilight. And there are tons. For anybody, though, who is not really, has been turned off by vampires in general because of Twilight and doesn't feel like they'll be able to find a show or a movie, I highly recommend, and this can go to your boyfriend or anyone else listening, I highly recommend Interview with the Vampire. Not the Tom Cruise, Brad Pitt version, though that is still a pretty good one. But the most recent one, the TV show that came out, is probably the best vampire show, probably the best vampire fiction to come out in the last maybe 20 years. So it's great. It's a fantastic show. The way that they modernize vampires, it's poetry, the dialogue, just everything about it is perfect. It's a almost 10 out of 10 show, and so I highly recommend it to anybody. And you'll find
I think that is the mark of a good
all about
too. Someone
Twilight.
Who it presents a challenge for them, but someone who can establish an entirely different story aside from that. I think that shows like what a creative creator looks like.
For sure.
A little bit early, but shout out for Jared's novel that's going to be coming out. It is a vampire story that is not Twilight, and it is very good, and it hits all these points that we wanted Twilight to expound on, but it failed to.
Yes, so buy it. No, I will say that I think the idea of, I had a thought, but it's like it's going, like it's escaping, and I'm trying to like maintain it. So
me trying to grab my soul after that climactic battle scene turned out to be a plot twist.
But I do think that overall culture, like the culture that Twilight has impacted, because I feel like it has impacted the culture in a lot of ways. I wonder if Twilight has had an impact beyond just vampires. Do you feel like Twilight has had an impact on other parts of culture for you?
I mean, for me, not really.
For you, yeah.
Time passed. It's its own little time capsule.
It lives in its own little universe. Anybody else? Twilight has no impact on my life whatsoever.
I'm trying to figure out how to say this next, because again, like Jada was saying, like it became like a comfort movie, a familiar thing, a joke for a certain generation. It was a fad. And it's because, like, it's still a joke to go back to. You still have people who joke about Team Edward versus Team Jacob. You still have people who take it seriously. You still have people talking about toxic boyfriends in the terms of Edward stalking Bella. Like, I feel like by definition it's influenced the culture because so many people grew up on it. I mean, like you said, Jared, with that, I mean, you had a girlfriend who that was her expectation. So you have an entire generation that grew up with this set before them as an ideal, beautiful story. And that's going, regardless of where you see it come out, like it's going to matter. It's going to affect them down the road. And I think that's a really good point for people who are writing stories to know you have a huge responsibility because your story is going to affect people for a very long time. And especially if you're targeting a younger audience in their formative years with something that they're supposed to think is ideal and be totally gaga for, that's going to impact how they grow into adults. And so you have to be really careful with that. There is a huge responsibility in stories. It's not just about becoming popular and making a ton of money. Like, maybe that was the filmmaker's goals. It seems like they tried to tell a story that had something more, but they failed. And that's a heavy responsibility to grapple with. So as a storyteller, you should always keep that in mind, that your story is going to affect people. And possibly for a very long time, and possibly in very great.
1,000% agree with that. And
and tying into The Room, like I said, these movies are freaking hilarious to me. I think they're camp, and I say that as a positive thing, especially in 2020. Okay, like in 2020, it made me so happy, and that's something actually kind of important. Like The Room, because The Room was meant to be this serious drama, and of course it's not. But that movie's hilarious. It's a legend. So even sometimes the big blunders can actually still mean something positive. It's a complicated situation for the creator, but I think it is still something, that's good to know that even your blunder can lead to something good. That's what I'm trying to say.
That's another good point.
I agree with that. And like I said, the thing that my thought that was escaping is aligned with what Zaylen said. I've caught it. And so the thought process is that, yes, I agree. There is a level of responsibility for every creative, no matter what your medium is. And I know that some people don't like that. I've had a lot of people tell me, I don't want that responsibility. I just want to make stuff and call it a day. But when it comes to storytelling, and in my opinion, every form of art, no matter what kind it is storytelling. When it comes to storytelling, recognizing that storytelling is, in fact, the connective tissue of our civilization, and I'll say it a billion times, you are, in essence, contributing to the fabric of our civilization with every story that you tell. What you choose to put out into the world is a choice that will not just impact you, but will impact generations to come. Even if you never become traditionally published, even if no one ever reads it other than your circle of friends, that within itself is something that matters. Even if technically your best friend is the only person you've ever showed it to, that is another human. That is another form of connection, and that they will take that with them. The lessons they learned from what they read, they'll take that with them, and that'll contribute to the way that they behave in society. So everything that you do, everything that you put out into the world, everything that you choose to remove from your Google Drive, share with other people, it matters. Your story, we say that at One Brilliant Art all the time, your story matters. And it's not just some catchy tagline that we like to throw around, it's the truth. And so the creators of Twilight, the creator of Twilight, Stephanie Meyer, regardless of whether I loved it or hated it or anyone else did, she added to the everlasting canon of human existence. And it matters. And that is a pretty cool fucking thing for anybody. That being said, the last question I have for you guys, good movie, bad movie, doesn't matter. What is one important storytelling lesson that you learned from the Twilight saga?
You can find good stuff in the corners of the frame. So like, say what thou will, I don't give a frack what you think. Vampire baseball. Yeah. That's coolish, dude.
Yeah.
And we've talked about the vampire family. That's not the focus, but it's there in the corner. And you can find that all the time. There's like terrible movies, but they'll have a really nice line, or a really nice idea. Like other stupid example here is like the Santa Claus, right? Tim Allen, bad movie, whatever, right? Somehow on TV and we're all forced to watch it, whatever. But you know what's really interesting about that movie? When he meets the elves and they're all kids, and one of the elves says, "I have shoes that are older than you," I believe that kid. And suddenly this elf feels way older and feels like you're in this magical place in the Santa Claus. And Twilight honestly was one of the things that really actually showed me that, because everyone was like, bitching and moaning and blah, 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 blah about this series because it was 2010s. We had no idea, the early 2010s, we had no idea the hellhole we were about to enter. But, like, everyone liked the family. Everyone liked the little vampire family idea. So you can always find something in there to take inspiration from. There's always something, or not always, but almost always, you can always find something to take inspiration from, even if it doesn't click, the rest doesn't click for you.
I feel like there's a bunch of little directions we could go in. I really liked what Charles said. I wish that I said it first, but instead I'm going to go back to the Team Jacob versus Team Edward thing, which I hate that I'm doing, but lessons about consent and self-destruction. Because we've all had a friend that we have watched make really bad decisions, and it sucks. Because you want to force them to not make that decision. But there is something to say for consent. Someone needs to want you to help them. Someone needs to want to make better choices. Sometimes they have to learn a lesson the hard way. And I wish that we're talking about sequels, I wish that we got to see Bella and Edward grow up and have to confront some of the toxic areas of their relationship. But, the main reason you kind of have to be Team Edward as opposed to Team Jacob, even though Jacob was the better choice for her and is probably more appealing if you're choosing, like, who's hotter. But
that was definitely my reason.
Yeah. I will agree that Jacob is hotter. However, if I have to choose a team, it's Team Edward because Bella consented to it. And I think that for us, that's a huge lesson in it sucks, but sometimes you have to watch people make poor decisions that you think will turn out badly for them. And if you are a family member of someone who wants to be a creative and go into a career that has, in your mind, no way of making money and setting themselves up for success, let them make that decision, because who knows, it might turn out well.
Yeah.
Either way, they'll be telling cool stories that matter. So, all right, I'm done.
I think for me, the thing that always stands out with the Twilight, the whole thing, is just how the artistic elements can carry a storyline that's not quite all the way there. Like, even in a movie where certain storytelling elements are lacking, you can still make it a successful work, depending on, obviously, your idea of success. But if your goal is just to turn heads and get a reaction out of people, Twilight definitely achieved that. Like, I work in a makeup store with a lot of younger girls, and anytime a glitter product of any sort comes out, it's always, "This is the skin of a killer, Bella." Like, it references all the time. Like, it's a part of my everyday life, and the movie doesn't necessarily affect me personally in my everyday life, but you see it everywhere. Like, it's literally everywhere. So I think, and again, I think that's mainly because of the artistic elements, because it's so recognizable, and because certain elements that were strong were so strong to the point where, like, everyone knows what that's from. I think that can be a huge lesson in just how important those little details are to a successful piece of work. No, it's...
I agree. I'm sorry to laugh, though. I just, in my mind, I envisioned, like, a serial killer just going to, like, Sephora and buying body glitter and being like, "This is the skin of a killer." It's just such a weird line. But yeah, for me, I think that most important storytelling lesson is one that we talked about all the way back on the first, all the way back. This is our 4th episode, right. But back on
it
our
might
first
be 5
episode,
if we have to split this one in half.
Yeah, that's true. This is the Warriors episode where we talked about problematic characters and problematic things. And this movie was a prime example of just that. The idea of, if you're going to write problematic characters, you need to make sure that they do one of two things. It's either a consequenced character, so that you send the message that there are consequences for actions, or the character grows and changes to learn that what they were doing wasn't bad and becomes better. I don't feel like that was done in Twilight, but in fact, it looks like all the problematic behavior was kind of rewarded, unless you're Jacob, in which case, it wasn't exactly rewarded. It was just kind of imprinted on a baby and then became a whole other thing. That's that. So overall, learn to write problematic stories. Don't shy away from them. Just do it right. And I think that'll be a solid thing. All that said, I want to end this whole thing with, before we do recommendations and then we get out of here, I want to say, as a disclaimer from the company itself, inspired by Charles in a statement that he made, yes, you, and when we watched Malcolm, when we talked about Malcolm and Marie,
mm-hmm.
I fully acknowledge the fact that Stephenie Meyer and the people who directed this film went out and did a thing. They went out and made it. They made a project. They filmed a thing. They wrote a story. They did that. And so my disdain for the end product is by no means meant to overshadow the ability to get out there and actually make something, because it is really easy to sit back and point fingers at stuff that other people have done who are doing things and say, that sucks, that's terrible. And we all have enough comment sections on Facebook and Discord and everywhere else where people are pointing the finger at people's work and shitting on it who've never done a thing in their life. And so I fully applaud Stephenie Meyer for the attempt. I fully applaud the director for the attempt. And it's only an attempt in my eyes. For there are countless others who love it and think it's fantastic, and great on you. But we appreciate the art. I'm a lover of the craft, whether good or bad. So for me, thank you from the company. Thank you for what you've done. And yeah, there's that. So recommendations, guys. One thing that you recommend people watch, listen to, read, or I guess that's it. Or play. If you're playing any video games, that also works too.
Charles, what do you have on your desk?
Oh, well, I'm going to shake things up. So I know, sorry. But I'm still going to say Battlestar Galactica. Good for you, Jared. You're getting there. Battlestar Galactica, it's one of my favorite things ever. But I decided I needed to flex and prove to people that I do read books instead of just comics and manga and etc. So my recommendation is this bad boy, Moby Dick by Herman Melville. Nice. I have read all of this book. This is me flexing. I love this book. There's a lot of criticisms I have with it, but ultimately it is a trip. There are parts of this book that will teleport you to realms you'll never been before, and it is masterful. If I could make a bitchin' animated film of this, I would, because I think this would be phenomenal. And Jeff Smith's art style, by the way, that would be the cartoonist Jeff Smith. But this is a great book. Read it, because I've read it, so this is me flexing.
This is jumping off of Moby Dick. Probably my favorite book that I read in my high school years in a historical literature class, but I love historical literature. I love historical fiction. This is actually true history. It's told in a little bit more modern language than Moby Dick, but it's called Heart of a Samurai by Margie Prius, and that is the story of the first Japanese person to land in the U.S., and it happened to be a young boy who was rescued by a whaling vessel.
This and I actually, history?
What was that?
This is real history?
Yes, it is. I actually got to go to New Bedford, Massachusetts, where the captain of the vessel that rescued him actually lived with him as his adopted son. And it's really cool. You can see like a real samurai sword in the historical society that was gifted to the city of New Bedford by a Japanese ambassador. Really cool, really amazing story. If you want to see, like, cultural shock through the eyes of someone who has never seen a culture before, but do it well with an interesting character, that's a good book.
That's really cool. I didn't know that.
Shout out to Massachusetts.
Yes.
Sorry.
Yeah.
No one cares.
It's my
Three
home.
of us
Sorry.
grew up in Massachusetts.
Yeah.
So.
No one cares about Boston. No one cares about Boston.
Everybody cares about what?
Or the Red Sox.
Let me tell you something.
Triggered.
You're getting right up there with that damn baby, Charles.
I gotta stick with Boy Meets World because in rewatching it once again, I'm just reminded how good it is. Like, I feel like the life lessons delivered in that show in episodes, like it's not even you don't have a full hour or over to deliver a story, but each individual episode takes you through an entirely different, like, portion and lesson that you learn throughout life. And it's delivered with humor. It's delivered with elements of relationships, friendships, relationships with family, like the importance of all of that. I don't know. It's just so good. I can't not love it. And I can't recommend it enough. Mm-hmm.
Age appropriate realism.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah,
for
Mr.
me,
Feeney is respect.
Yes.
Forever.
Yes.
For me, it is. I have two recommendations. One is not because it's good, but because it will be the most hilarious time you will spend. If you've ever seen that weird skit with Lance Reddick where he talks about where he works at the toy store and he says that if you break my rules or something like that, I will shit in places that will have you confused for years to come. That the movie that I'm about to recommend is one of that. When you watch it, it will have you confused for years to come, especially the ending. And that is the movie Horns with Daniel Radcliffe, where he is the devil, I guess, or something, a demon or whatever. But it is the most confusing and tonally off movie I've ever seen. It is not good at all. A lot of people like it. I hated it. But I recommend you watch it because I saw it and you have to see it now too. And it's pretty hilarious. Nonetheless, it's pretty funny. But for a good movie, this is a classic that I think everybody should watch, especially if you have religious views that you're contending with. Dogma. Dogma is classic Kevin Smith movie, and it is awesome. Old school Matt Damon and Ben Affleck, Chris Rock, Jay and Silent Bob. You just can't go wrong. It's a fantastic movie. I watched that this weekend and I forgot how much I loved it, but I do. It's one of my favorite movies. So check it out. That's all of them. That being said, guys, thank you all of you for putting up one with my rants and my long tangents that are arguably the reason why this episode is almost 2.5. No, it is 2.5 hours long.
We did it.
I need to go home now.
Yes.
Boss.
So thank you for putting up with that.
Boss.
Thank you, Jada, for joining us and suggesting this film. This was a wonderful conversation. So we're glad to have had you, and definitely come back because of course.
We'll get you better Wi-Fi. We'll get you out of Wyoming, get you better Wi-Fi, and then we can do this more regularly.
Other than that, guys, thank you so much for listening. If you listened all the way through, or if you're a YouTube surfer and you only listen into the clips, that's cool too. But thank you for checking us out. Next week, I think we're going to the next episode, I think, and this is subject to change, but I think we're going to go with Inglourious Basterds. Quentin Tarantino's Inglourious Basterds, which is also another one of my favorite movies. Best villain ever. Anyway, that being said, hope you guys enjoyed. Go watch Twilight if you have to, and let us know what you think about it. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.